The divorce papers felt like sandpaper in Rachel Morgan's hands. She sat in the family court waiting room, her 4-year-old son Jamie pressed against her side, both of them wearing clothes from the donation bin at St. Mary's because there wasn't money for anything else. Across from them sat Derek, her ex-husband, in his pressed suit and Italian shoes, his new girlfriend draped on his arm like expensive jewelry Rachel could never afford. The mediator's voice was clinical, detached, reading terms that would shape Jamie's entire childhood.
If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today.
Full custody to Derek Morgan. Rachel may have supervised visitation every other Sunday, pending completion of parenting classes and proof of stable housing and employment. Derek didn't even look at her as the mediator spoke. He was texting someone, probably his lawyer, probably already planning his next move. Rachel's hands shook as she signed where they told her to sign, watching her son's future slip away, one signature at a time. "You understand the conditions," the mediator said, more statement than question. "You need to demonstrate financial stability, current employment in a gas station convenience store, and residence in a weekly motel do not meet the court standards for primary custody." "I'm working 3 jobs," Rachel managed, her voice cracking. "I clean offices at night, stock shelves on weekends, work the gas station during the day. I'm trying. Trying isn't succeeding." Derek spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the smooth confidence of someone who'd never had to choose between groceries and electricity. "Jamie needs stability, a real home, not whatever weekly motel you can afford." Rachel felt Jamie's small hand find hers, squeezing tight. The boy was too young to understand the legal terminology, but old enough to sense his mother's pain. She wanted to scream, to fight, to explain that Derek had left them with nothing when he walked out 2 years ago, that he'd drained their joint account to fund his startup, that she'd been rebuilding from rubble while he'd been building his tech empire. But screaming wouldn't change anything. The law didn't care about fairness. It cared about bank statements and lease agreements and evidence of stability she didn't have. They walked out of that courthouse into the Philadelphia heat. Rachel's vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall in front of Jamie. Her phone buzzed, a text from her landlord at the weekly motel. "Rent due tomorrow, $340. She had $127 in her checking account and 3 days until payday. The math didn't work. It never worked. "Mommy, are we going home?" Jamie asked, his voice small. "Soon, baby. We're going home soon." But home was a 200-square-foot room with a hot plate and a shared bathroom down the hall. Home was the place Derek's lawyer had photographed for court, presenting glossy images of peeling wallpaper and water-stained ceilings as evidence of Rachel's failures. Home was the reason she was losing her son. That night, after Jamie fell, asleep curled around his stuffed dinosaur, Rachel sat on the motel bed with her laptop balanced on her knees, searching for apartments she could afford, for jobs that paid more than minimum wage, for any path forward that didn't involve watching her son grow up in someone else's house. She'd been scrolling through rental listings for 2 hours when she saw the auction notice. Online estate auction, Morganville, Pennsylvania. 127 items, including commercial property. The name caught her attention first, Morganville, like it was calling to her. Then the listings, antique furniture, farming equipment, books, kitchen supplies, and buried in the middle of page 7, Lot 43, commercial Tannery building, 14,000 SQFT, built 1889, as is condition, condemned property, minimum bid $500. Rachel clicked through the photos. The building was a monster, 3 stories of crumbling brick and broken windows. Vines covered half the structure. The roof sagged in the middle like a broken spine. Every photo showed more decay, more damage, More reasons no sane person would touch the property. The description was brutally honest. Property has been condemned by township. Estimated $400,000 in repairs needed to bring up to code. No electricity, no running water, structural damage throughout. Buyer responsible for all liens, back taxes, and environmental remediation costs. This is a tear-down property sold for land value only. No one in their right mind would bid on this. Rachel clicked to the next photo and her breath caught. It was an interior shot, probably taken decades ago before the decay set in. The main floor showed massive wooden beams, brick archways, and windows that must have been 12 feet tall. There was something haunting about it, something that spoke of craftsmanship and history, and lives lived within those walls. She checked the property details. 2.3 acres, zoned commercial residential. The minimum bid was $500, and the auction ended in 3 days. Rachel did the math she'd avoided all evening. After paying the motel rent tomorrow, she'd have $127 left. Her next paycheck was $890, but $600 went to Derek for child support. Court-ordered payments to the man who'd left her with nothing. That left $290 for 2 weeks of food, gas, and survival. She couldn't afford this. Couldn't afford to throw money at a condemned building 200 miles away. Couldn't afford another risk, another gamble, another way to fail. But maybe that was the point. Maybe she had nothing left to lose. She registered for the auction, finger hovering over the submit button for a full minute before pressing it. 3 days later, Rachel sat in the motel room watching the auction countdown on her laptop. Jamie was with Derek for his supervised visit, which meant Rachel was alone with her laptop and a debit card linked to an account holding $847, money she'd scraped together by working double shifts and skipping every meal she could hide from Jamie. The Tannery building had 15 bids when she started, watching. The price sat at $650. Someone named Property Flip 27 seemed determined to win, pushing the price higher every time someone else bid. With 5 minutes left, the price hit $800. Rachel's heart hammered. This was insane. She was about to spend almost all her money on a building that was literally falling apart 200 miles away. The smart thing would be to close the laptop, go to work, keep grinding away at the life that was slowly crushing her. Her phone buzzed. A text from Derek. Jamie had a great time today. Asked why you live in such a small place. Might want to think about that before our next custody hearing. The rage that filled Rachel was white-hot and purifying. She'd spent 2 years accepting his cruelty, absorbing his judgment, believing somehow that she deserved this poverty and shame and loss. But something in that text shattered whatever remained of her willingness to be small. She placed her bid, $800, the maximum her account would allow. For 2 minutes, nothing happened. Then, with 30 seconds left, Property Flip 27 bid $825. Rachel's finger jabbed the bid button. $850, 10 seconds, 5. The auction ended. Lot 43, Commercial Tannery Building, sold to user Rachel M. 85 for $850. Rachel stared at the screen, her hands shaking. She'd just spent her entire savings on a condemned building in a town she'd never visited. This was either the bravest or stupidest thing she'd ever done. Probably both. The email arrived the next morning with the property deed, a PDF showing Rachel Morgan as the legal owner of 14,000 square feet of disaster. Morganville was 200 miles northwest of Philadelphia, a dying industrial town that had once thrived on leather tanning, but now existed mainly as a highway exit people passed without stopping. Rachel called in sick to all 3 of her jobs, something she'd never done before. She strapped Jamie into her 15-year-old Honda with its cracked windshield and taped-together bumper, and they drove northwest through October rain that turned the world gray and cold. "Where are we going?" Jamie asked, clutching his dinosaur. "To see our new house. Is it big?"
If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this.
Rachel glanced at the property photos on her phone, at the crumbling brick and broken windows. "Yeah, baby, it's big." Morganville appeared through the rain like something from another century. Main Street was 4 blocks of empty storefronts and faded awnings. A diner called Betty's promised breakfast all day, but looked like it hadn't seen a customer in years. The gas station was closed, handwritten signs saying gone out of business. Even the stoplights seemed to hang crooked and defeated. Rachel followed the GPS down increasingly narrow roads until they reached the Tannery. It sat on the edge of town, surrounded by overgrown fields and dead trees, looking even worse than the photos suggested. The brick was stained almost black with age and pollution. Windows were shattered or missing entirely. The front entrance hung open, the door torn from its hinges years ago. "This is our house." Jamie's voice was small. "For now," Rachel said, trying to sound confident. "It needs work, but we're going to make it beautiful." They got out of the car, rain soaking through their discount store jackets. Rachel had brought a flashlight, work gloves, and a crowbar, tools of exploration she couldn't really afford. Together, hand in hand, they approached the entrance. The smell hit her first, mold and decay, and something chemical that made her eyes water. The main floor opened up before them, a vast space of shadows and ruin. Wooden beams overhead were massive, old-growth timber that modern buildings didn't use anymore. The floor was concrete, cracked and stained but solid. And along one wall, Rachel saw something that made her stop. Metal hooks hung from ceiling tracks, dozens of them, designed to move hides through the tanning process. Some still had leather scraps attached, preserved by the chemicals that had once filled this place. It was haunting and beautiful and terrible all at once. "Mommy, it smells bad." "I know, baby. Let's see what's upstairs." The staircase was metal, industrial, and surprisingly solid. It led to the second floor, which had been divided into smaller rooms, offices maybe, or storage. Most were empty except for debris and pigeon nests, but one room at the far end had a door that was closed and locked, the only intact door Rachel had seen. She used the crowbar to pry it open, the wood splintering with a crack that echoed through the empty building. Inside was an office, untouched for decades. A desk sat in the corner, papers still scattered across its surface. Filing cabinets lined one wall, and on the opposite wall hung photographs, black and white images of the tannery in its glory days. Men in leather aprons working the hides, women stitching in the finishing room. A family portrait showing a stern-faced man in a suit, a woman beside him, and 3 children standing at attention. Rachel picked up one of the papers on the desk. It was a letter, dated March 1987, from the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. Notice of violation for chemical storage. Fines assessed. Mandatory remediation required. She found more letters underneath, each more urgent than the last. Final notice, court order, property condemned. Then nothing. The tannery had simply been abandoned, locked, and left to rot. "Who were you?" Rachel whispered to the stern-faced man in the photograph. "Why did you leave?" A sound from below made her freeze. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving across the main floor. Someone else was in the building. Rachel grabbed Jamie's hand and pulled him behind the desk, covering his mouth with her hand to keep him quiet. The footsteps climbed the stairs, methodical, unhurried. Then a man's voice called out, "Hello? Anyone here? I saw your car outside." Rachel hesitated, then stood up slowly. "We're here. Don't shoot or anything. We own this building." The man who appeared in the doorway was maybe 60, weathered face and flannel shirt, carrying a toolbox instead of a weapon. He studied Rachel and Jamie with eyes that had seen too much. "You're the one who bought this place at auction?" "That's right." Rachel lifted her chin, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. "I'm Rachel Morgan. This is my son, Jamie." The man nodded slowly. "Tom Fletcher. I run the hardware store in town. Heard someone was crazy enough to buy the old Kessler place." Kessler? Family that owned the Tannery from 1889 until it closed. Henry Kessler ran it until he died in 1987. Then his son tried keeping it going, but the EPA came down hard on the chemical violations. Place has been empty ever since. Tom walked into the room, examining the filing cabinets. "You know what you're getting into here? This building's been condemned for 37 years, probably $500,000 in back taxes and liens, not to mention the environmental cleanup." Rachel's stomach sank. "I paid $850 for it. That's all I have." Tom studied her for a long moment. "Why'd you buy it?" "Because I needed something. Anything. Proof that I could build something instead of watching everything fall apart." She surprised herself with the honesty. Her voice broke slightly. "I'm losing custody of my son because I don't have a real home. This building is falling apart, but at least it's mine." Tom's expression softened. "The town's been trying to get someone to do something with this place for decades. You want help assessing what you're dealing with? I can spare a few hours." Over the next 3 hours, Tom walked Rachel through the building from roof to basement, cataloging damage with brutal efficiency. The roof needed complete replacement. The third floor was structurally unsound. The electrical system had been stripped by scavengers. The plumbing was rusted through. Every window needed replacing. But underneath the decay, the bones were solid. The brick walls were 18 inches thick. The timber beams were old-growth oak that would last another century. The foundation was granite, uncracked despite decades of neglect. "You're looking at $400,000 to $500,000 to make this livable," Tom said finally, his notebook full of estimates. "That's if you do most of the labor yourself and buy materials at cost. If you hire contractors, double it." Rachel sat on the concrete floor, Jamie asleep beside her with his head in her lap. "I don't have $400,000. I don't even have $400 right now. Then I've got to ask, why are you here? Because giving up is worse." She met Tom's eyes. "I've been giving up for 2 years, accepting poverty, accepting loss, accepting that I deserve whatever scraps life throws me. But maybe I don't. Maybe I deserve to fight for something, even if I lose." Tom was quiet for a moment, then stood. "I'm going to make some calls. You stay here, look around, see if you still want this tomorrow. Where should we sleep tonight?" "My car. The old Kessler house is 3 blocks from here. Been empty since Henry died. Town owns it now, trying to sell it, but nobody's buying." He pulled out a key ring, removed 1 key, and handed it to Rachel. "Property manager's key. Place has heat and water still connected. Town council won't miss 1 night of utilities. Tom, I can't just break into someone's house. You're not breaking in. You're temporarily occupying a property the town's desperate to offload. Consider it an extended showing." He smiled slightly. "Besides, you're the first person in 37 years to show any interest in the Tannery. That makes you valuable to Morganville, whether you know it or not." The Kessler house was a small Victorian, 2 bedrooms and faded wallpaper, but clean and dry. Rachel found sheets in a linen closet and made a bed for Jamie, then sat at the kitchen table with a calculator and a growing sense of despair. Her phone buzzed. Text from Derek. "Court hearing moved up to next month. My lawyer says we'll get full custody then. Hope you found that stable housing. Good luck." Rachel put her head down on the table and let herself cry. Not loud, not dramatic, just silent tears that soaked into the wood. She'd gambled everything on a condemned building she couldn't afford to fix. She was squatting in a dead man's house with her 4-year-old son. In 1 month, a judge would take Jamie away permanently because Rachel had failed to prove she was a fit mother. The calculator screen showed $0 in resources and $500,000 in needs. The math didn't work. It would never work. But in the morning, something had changed. Maybe it was sleeping in a real bed for the first time in months. Maybe it was Jamie's excited chattering about having a whole house to explore. Or maybe it was the simple fact that Rachel had driven 200 miles, spent her last $850, and she wasn't going to walk away now. She made breakfast from supplies in her car, crackers and peanut butter and the last juice box. Then they went back to the tannery. In daylight, the building looked both worse and better. Worse because she could see every crack and missing brick and sign of decay. Better because morning light streaming through the broken windows revealed details she'd missed. Architectural elements that spoke of craftsmanship, of builders who'd made things to last. Rachel started on the main floor, armed with a broom and work gloves, sweeping decades of debris into piles. It was futile, like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon, but it was something. It was action instead of surrender. Tom appeared around noon with 2 other men, both weathered and flannel-clad. "This is Pete and Martin. They run the electric and plumbing supply companies. We've been talking." Tom set down a cardboard box containing sandwiches and coffee. "Morganville's dying. Everyone knows it. Kids move away soon as they graduate. Businesses close. Properties sit empty. But if someone was willing to invest in the tannery, actually do something with this space, it might bring attention, might bring hope." "So here's our offer," Tom continued. "We supply materials at cost. Pete handles electrical. Martin does plumbing. I do general contracting. You pay for materials only, no labor, and you work alongside us every step of the way. We'll make this building livable." Rachel stared at them. "Why would you do this? Because Tom said you drove 200 miles with your kid to claim a building you bought for $850. Pete grinned. "That's either crazy or brave. Either way, it's more than anyone else has done. What's the catch?" Martin spoke for the first time. "You commit. You don't quit halfway. You see this through even when it gets hard, and it will get hard. You turn this building into something that matters, not just to you, but to this town. And you pay us back when you can. No interest, no timeline, just eventually." Rachel felt tears prick her eyes. "I don't understand. Why would you trust me?" "Because Tom said, you bought a condemned building with your last $850. That tells us everything we need to know about your commitment." Over the next week, Rachel fell into a rhythm that was exhausting and exhilarating. She dropped Jamie at a daycare in town, a church-run program that agreed to delayed payment until she got back on her feet. Then she worked at the tannery from dawn until dusk, learning skills she'd never imagined needing. Tom taught her to frame walls. Pete showed her how to run electrical conduit. Martin explained pipe threading and water pressure. They worked methodically, starting with the structural issues, then moving to systems, then to finishes. The town noticed. At first, people drove by slowly, staring at the activity. Then they started stopping. A woman named Sarah brought lunch, sandwiches, and thermoses of soup. She owned the diner and had been watching the tannery decay for decades. Seeing someone actually work on it made her cry. An old man named Frank stopped by with boxes of his late wife's dishes. "Heard you might need supplies. She'd want them to be used." A young couple brought paint samples, asking if Rachel needed help choosing colors. They'd just moved to Morganville and wanted to see it thrive again. But not everyone was supportive. Rachel was measuring windows on the second floor when she heard a vehicle pull up, expensive engine rumbling. She looked out to see a black Mercedes, pristine and gleaming, impossibly out of place in this dying town. The man who emerged wore a suit that probably cost more than Rachel's car. Mid-40s, silver at the temples, the kind of polished confidence that came from never being told no. He entered the tannery without knocking. You're Rachel Morgan? She came down the stairs slowly, work gloves in hand. Who's asking? Marcus Webb. I'm a real estate developer from Pittsburgh. Heard someone was attempting to renovate this building. His tone made attempting sound like a child's art project. That's right. I own it. Webb smiled without warmth. Actually, that's why I'm here. You don't own this property free and clear. There are liens, back taxes, environmental remediation, bonds. The total debt associated with this building is approximately $340,000. You bought the asset, but you also bought the liabilities. Rachel felt the floor tilt. What are you talking about? The county records show everything. Webb pulled out a folder, professionally printed documents with highlighted sections, property tax arrears from 1987 to present, compounding annually. EPA remediation bonds required before the building can be legally occupied. Township liens for code violations never addressed. It's all public record. The previous owner's estate abandoned the property rather than deal with these debts. Now they're yours. Tom appeared in the doorway, Pete and Martin behind him. Who's this? Rachel's voice was steady despite the panic clawing at her throat. Marcus Webb. He says I owe $340,000 in liens and back taxes. Webb's smile widened. Don't worry, Miss Morgan. I'm here with a solution. I'll pay off all the liens and back taxes in exchange for the deed. You'll walk away clean. No debt, no obligations. I'll even give you $5,000 for your trouble. You want to buy my building. I want to solve your problem. Webb gestured around the space. You can't afford this. You're a single mother working minimum wage who spent your last $850 on a disaster. This is obviously above your capacity. Cut your losses before they destroy you. Rachel felt Jamie's dinosaur in her pocket, carried everywhere as a reminder of what she was fighting for. No. Excuse me? I said no. This building is mine. I'll figure out the liens. Webb's expression hardened. You'll fail. Then I'll buy it at the tax sale for pennies, and you'll have wasted months of your life for nothing. Why not take the smart option now? Because the smart option is what got me here in the first place. Rachel's voice gained strength. Smart was staying in a bad marriage. Smart was accepting minimum wage. Smart was watching my son grow up in someone else's house because I couldn't prove I deserved him. I'm done with smart. I'm trying impossible instead. Tom stepped forward. The town council has authority to forgive municipal liens in cases of economic development. We've done it before. I'll call an emergency session. Pete nodded. Environmental bonds can be restructured over time. It's not due all at once. Martin crossed his arms. And property taxes can be settled through payment plans. She's got options, Webb. You're not the only solution. Webb studied them all for a moment, then focused back on Rachel. You're making a mistake. My offer stands for 48 hours. After that, I'll wait for you to fail and buy this place for the actual value, which is nothing. He walked out, his Mercedes leaving tracks in the mud. Rachel sank down onto a sawhorse, hands shaking. $340,000. How is that even possible? Because nobody's paid attention to this property for 37 years. Tom's expression was grim. Taxes compound, liens accumulate. It's designed to punish abandonment, but it punishes new owners too. Can we really get it? Forgiven? Some of it maybe, but not all. You're going to need money, Rachel. Real money. The town can help, but not with everything. That night, Rachel sat in the Kessler house with a laptop and a prayer. She'd been documenting the renovation on her phone, posting photos and brief updates to social media, more as a journal than anything else. Now she created a proper post. I am Rachel Morgan. 6 weeks ago, I bought a condemned building for $850, hoping to create a home for my son. But I just learned I also bought $340,000 in liens and back taxes. I'm a single mother working 3 jobs. I have no trust fund, no safety net. No rich relatives, but I have this building and I have determination. I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for a chance. If you believe people like me deserve second chances, if you believe in fighting even when the odds are impossible, please share this. Maybe someone out there has a solution I can't see. She posted it at midnight and went to sleep expecting nothing. By morning, her phone was exploding. The post had been shared 10,000 times, then 50,000, then 200,000. Comments poured in, most supportive, some cruel, but all engaged. A local news station in Pittsburgh called, wanting to do a story, then a Philadelphia station, then CNN. The struggling single mother fighting to keep her home became a narrative the internet couldn't resist. Donations started coming in. $5 here, $20 there. People moved by her story, or maybe just by the photograph of Jamie asleep in the tannery with his dinosaur, trusting his mother to build something from ruin. In 3 days, the GoFundMe reached $15,000. In a week, $45,000. People sent materials too, boxes of electrical supplies and plumbing fixtures and lumber, shipped from across the country by strangers who believed in what Rachel was building. But Marcus Webb noticed too. He appeared again, this time with a woman in an expensive pantsuit and a man carrying a briefcase. "This is my attorney, and this is a representative from the county tax office." Rachel's stomach sank. "What do you want?" The woman from the tax office spoke. "Miss Morgan, the county has serious concerns about your ability to satisfy the outstanding debt on this property. We're here to discuss foreclosure proceedings." Tom stepped forward. "You can't foreclose. She's making improvements. She's bringing value to a property that's been worthless for decades." The attorney smiled coldly. "She's also accumulating additional debt without addressing the primary obligation. Every day she delays payment, interest compounds. The county has a responsibility to collect what's owed." "So here's what's going to happen," Webb said. "The county will begin foreclosure proceedings. It's a 90-day process. During that time, you can attempt to raise the full $340,000. If you succeed, great. If not, I'll purchase the property at the foreclosure sale, and the county gets paid. Everyone wins." "Except me," Rachel said quietly. "You'll lose the building, but you'll keep the crowdfunding money. That's more than you started with." Webb's tone was almost gentle. "You tried, Rachel. That's admirable. But sometimes trying isn't enough." They left formal foreclosure notices on what passed for her desk. Rachel read them with Tom, Pete, and Martin, looking over her shoulder. 90 days to pay $340,000 or lose everything. What happens if I don't pay? You lose the building, Webb buys it. All your work, all the materials, all the effort becomes his. Tom's voice was heavy. "And you still owe us for materials. No interest, but still debt. How much have I spent already? About $50,000 in materials. Plus your labor, our labor, probably $100,000 in total value added to the building." Rachel did the math. The GoFundMe had $45,000. She needed $340,000. Even if donations continued at the current rate, she'd never reach it in 90 days. This was impossible, but something Tom had said weeks ago echoed in her mind. You turn this building into something that matters, not just to you, but to this town. She looked at the 3 men who'd worked beside her for 6 weeks, who'd taught her and supported her and believed in her. What if we're thinking about this wrong? What do you mean? What if the tannery isn't just a building? What if it's a solution? The idea came together as she spoke, raw and half-formed, but growing stronger. Morganville is dying because people leave. They leave because there's nothing here, no jobs, no opportunities, no future. But what if the tannery became something that brought people back? Rachel pulled out her phone, scrolling through the photos she'd taken. This space is massive, 14,000 square feet. What if we turned it into artist studios, live work spaces where people could create and sell? What if we brought in makers and craftspeople who can't afford city rent? Tom's eyes widened. Artisan district, boutique manufacturing. Pete nodded slowly. We've got the space for 20 separate studios. Each one could house a different trade. Martin pulled out his calculator. If you charged $500 a month per studio, that's $10,000 monthly income. Times 12 months, that's $120,000 annual revenue. Not enough to pay the debt in 90 days, but enough to convince a bank it's worth investing in. Tom was grinning now. You're not trying to raise $340,000 in donations. You're creating a business model that makes the building worth $340,000 in debt. It's called asset-based lending. If the building can generate income, banks will finance the liens. Rachel's hands shook as she opened her laptop. We need to move fast. The foreclosure clock is ticking. Over the next 72 hours, Rachel slept maybe 8 hours total. She created a business plan, something she'd never done before, researching similar artisan districts in dying industrial towns that had transformed their economies. She documented every aspect of the Tannery renovation, showing the building's bones and potential. She calculated costs and revenue and projected growth, and she reached out to everyone she could think of: local banks, regional development agencies, state programs for rural economic development. Most said no immediately. Too risky, unproven business model, insufficient collateral. But one bank, a small regional institution in Pittsburgh, said maybe. Their commercial loan officer, a woman named Patricia Chen, drove out to see the Tannery. She walked through with Rachel, asking pointed questions about cash flow and market analysis and risk mitigation. At the end, she stood in the main floor and looked up at those massive timber beams. This is either genius or insane. Rachel had heard this before, probably both. Patricia smiled. I'm going to need proof of concept. You need to show me this model works before I can justify the loan. Show me you can fill these studios. Show me artists want to be here. How much time do I have? 2 weeks. After that, my approval window closes. Get me 10 signed lease commitments and I'll finance the liens. Rachel launched a campaign that night. She posted on every artist forum and craftsperson group she could find. Subsidized studio space in a historic Tannery building, $300 per month. Utilities included. Live work arrangements available. Be part of revitalizing a dying town. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Potters from Philadelphia looking to escape high rent. Woodworkers from Pittsburgh needing more space. Leather workers drawn to the building's tanning history. Jewelers, painters, sculptors, people who'd been priced out of cities but still wanted community. Rachel conducted interviews via video call, showing them the space and explaining the vision. Some were skeptical, others were excited. Within a week, she had 8 commitments. She needed 10. The 9th came from an unlikely source. Derek called, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. I saw your story on the news. You're making me look bad, parading our son around your fundraising campaign. I wasn't parading anyone. I was showing my life. You're using Jamie to manipulate people. It's disgusting. Rachel felt something inside her snap. I'm fighting for Jamie. That's what mothers do. She paused. Something you would understand if you'd ever fought for anyone but yourself. There was silence on the line. Then Derek's voice came back. Different somehow. Quieter. How much do you need to keep the building? Why? Because maybe, just maybe, you're right. Maybe I should have fought harder for us instead of walking away when things got difficult. He sighed. I can't give you much. $10,000. It's what I have liquid. It won't fix everything, but it's something. Rachel didn't trust it. Why would you help me? Because Jamie deserves better than what we're giving him. A mother working herself to death and a father who abandoned them. Maybe if you succeed with this building, if you actually create stability, maybe we can both be better parents. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't reconciliation, but it was $10,000, and the first time Derek had acknowledged his own failures, she took it. The 10th commitment came from an unexpected place. Tom appeared at the tannery with an old man Rachel hadn't met, bent with age but sharp-eyed. "This is Henry Kessler Jr. His father built this place." Henry Jr. studied the renovations with an expression Rachel couldn't read. After 20 minutes of silence, he spoke. "My father poured his life into this building. When he died, I tried keeping it going, but I was never the businessman he was. The EPA violations, the fines, I couldn't handle it. So I walked away. Spent 37 years feeling like a failure. Rachel understood that feeling intimately. But now someone's doing what I couldn't," Henry continued. "Someone's bringing this place back to life." He pulled out a weathered leather portfolio. "I'm a craftsman, made leather goods my whole life, just never had the courage to do it professionally. If you're serious about this artisan district, I'd like to be part of it." He handed her a lease commitment form already signed. Studio 10, Henry Kessler Jr., leather goods. Rachel had her 10 commitments. She drove to Pittsburgh the next morning, portfolio in hand, and presented Patricia Chen with signed leases from artists ready to move in. Patricia studied them carefully, asked more questions, ran more numbers. Then she looked up. "I'm approving the loan, $340,000 to satisfy all liens and back taxes. 10-year term. Interest rate is higher than I'd like because of the risk, but it's doable. There's one condition." "What's that?" "You can't fail. These artists are depending on you. This town is depending on you. If you default, it won't just be your building at risk. It'll be 10 people's livelihoods and a community's hope." "I understand." Rachel's hand shook as she signed the loan documents. The weight of it was crushing. She'd just taken on $340,000 in debt with no guarantee of success. But she'd also bought herself time. The foreclosure was stopped. The building was saved, and she had a chance to build something real. Marcus Webb appeared the day the liens were satisfied, pulling up in his Mercedes while Rachel was installing drywall on the second floor. "I heard you got financing. That's impressive." "What do you want, Webb?" "Just wanted to say congratulations. You've postponed the inevitable. The artistic types you're courting, they're flaky. They won't pay rent consistently. Half will be gone in 6 months. You'll default on the loan and I'll buy this place at the bank sale instead of the tax sale. Same outcome, different path." Rachel set down her drill. "Why do you care so much? Why not just move on to easier projects? Because this building sits on land I want." Webb gestured toward the fields beyond the tannery. 2.3 acres perfectly positioned between the highway and the town center. Ideal for commercial development. A strip mall would do well here. Fast food franchises, dollar stores. The kind of businesses dying towns like Morganville actually need. Not artisan studios, not vanity. Projects for single mothers playing entrepreneur. You think hope is a vanity project? I think hope is expensive, and you can't afford it. Webb drove away, leaving Rachel standing in sawdust and uncertainty. Maybe he was right. Maybe she'd just delayed failure, not prevented it. The first artists moved in on a cold November morning, 6 weeks before Christmas. Rachel had finished 5 studios on the second floor, basic but functional. Heat, electricity, water, secure doors, large windows. The rest would be completed as budget allowed. The artists arrived in beat-up vans and borrowed trucks, carrying tools and equipment and dreams. A potter named Sophia set up her wheel by a window overlooking the fields. A woodworker named James claimed the largest space, already planning his workshop layout. A jeweler named Marina spread her tools across a workbench, grinning like a child on Christmas morning. And Henry Kessler Jr. took Studio 10, hanging his father's photograph on the wall before unpacking his leather tools. Tom, Pete, and Martin organized a town gathering that evening. Half of Morganville showed up, maybe 300 people, to tour the renovated spaces and meet the artists. Sarah from the diner brought food. Frank brought his late wife's quilts to sell on consignment. Families walked through, touching the brick walls and timber beams, marveling that the building they'd watched decay for decades was alive again. Jamie ran through the studios with other children, his laughter echoing off high ceilings. Rachel watched him from the main floor, exhausted and terrified and hopeful all at once. A hand touched her shoulder. Tom stood beside her, smiling. "You did this, we did this, all of us together." Tom shook his head. "We helped, but you started it. You drove 200 miles with your last $850 and refused to quit. That's what changed everything." The first month's rent came in. 9 of 10 artists paid on time. The 10th, James the woodworker, was 3 days late but paid with apologies and a handmade cutting board as extra. $3,000 in revenue against $6,000 in monthly loan payment, utilities, and maintenance. Rachel covered the difference from her wages, still working 2 jobs now instead of 3. The second month was better. All 10 paid on time. Rachel completed 3 more studios and signed 2 new leases, $3,900 in revenue against $6,000 in costs. She was losing $20,100 monthly, a sustainable loss that would reverse once more studios filled. The third month, disaster struck. The main water line froze and burst during a cold snap, flooding the first floor. The damage was extensive. $15,000 in repairs Rachel didn't have. Insurance didn't cover it because she hadn't been able to afford adequate coverage. She sat in the flooded space at 3 a.m., water soaking through her boots, and calculated the math. The GoFundMe was depleted. Her wages were barely covering the loss between rent and expenses. She had maybe $2,000 in her account. The pipe repair would take all of it, and she'd still be short $13,000. Webb's offer echoed in her mind. $5,000 to walk away. It would be enough to start over somewhere else, maybe rent a small apartment, try again to get custody of Jamie. The smart thing would be to accept defeat. But morning brought salvation from an unexpected source. The artists held an emergency meeting. "We're not losing this place," Sophia said firmly. "We pooled our resources. Together we've got $8,000. It's not enough for the full repair, but it's a start." James added, "I can do some of the labor. Martin's teaching me plumbing. I'll work for materials cost." Marina held up her phone. "I posted about the flood on social media. We've got $4,000 in donations already from people who followed your original campaign. They still believe in this." Henry Kessler Jr. set a weathered metal box on the table. "My father left me this when he died. Insurance payout from when my mother passed. I was keeping it for emergencies." He opened it to reveal neat stacks of bills. $20,000. "I want to invest it in this building. Make it a loan if you need to, or a partnership, or whatever works. But I'm not watching this place die again." Rachel couldn't speak. These people, most of whom she'd known for only 3 months, were risking their savings for a building that might still fail. "Why would you do this? Why would you risk everything?" Because Henry said quietly, "This place is home now, and you fight for home." The repairs took 2 weeks, and every penny they'd pooled. But the Tannery survived. More than survived. The flood brought media attention again. Local news covered the artists rallying to save their studios. The story went regional, then national. Good Morning America did a segment about the artisan district in a dying town. Orders poured in for the artists' work. Sophia's pottery was backlogged for months. James's furniture was featured in design magazines. Marina's jewelry was picked up by 3 boutiques in Philadelphia. The artisan district wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. By spring, all 20 studios were leased. Rachel had a waiting list of 30 more artists wanting space. The revenue exceeded costs for the first time, $10,000 monthly after all expenses. She was making a profit. She could breathe. The custody hearing was scheduled for June, 1 year after Rachel had bought the Tannery. She walked into the courthouse wearing a dress Sophia had made, carrying a portfolio documenting everything she'd built. Derek was already there, his lawyer beside him, but Derek's expression wasn't the cold contempt she'd expected. It was something else. Respect, maybe, or possibly regret. The judge reviewed the documents, copies of the business plan, financial statements showing profitability, photographs of the renovated tannery, letters from the artists and town residents attesting to Rachel's character and stability, a video Jamie had made showing his room on the 3rd floor of the tannery, decorated with artwork from the studios and filled with more joy than Rachel had seen in years. "Miss Morgan," the judge said finally, "when you were here last year, you were living in a weekly motel, working 3 minimum wage jobs. Now you own a profitable business, provide housing for 20 artists, and have created an economic anchor for a dying town. That's remarkable." "Thank you, Your Honor." The judge looked at Derek. "Mr. Morgan, do you wish to maintain your petition for full custody?" Derek was quiet for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "No, Your Honor. I think Jamie's exactly where he needs to be." The judge's gavel came down. Joint custody is granted with primary residence with the mother. Standard visitation for the father. This case is closed. Rachel felt her knees go weak. Jamie was hers. Really, truly hers. They'd won. Outside the courthouse, Derek approached, hands in pockets. "I'm sorry for all of it, for leaving, for fighting you for custody, for not believing you could do this." Rachel didn't know what to say. The anger she'd carried for 2 years had faded somewhere between buying a condemned building and turning it into home. "I'm glad you're here now, that you want to be part of Jamie's life. Can I see it? The tannery, your building." They drove to Morganville together, and strange, awkward peace forming between them. Derek walked through the studios, meeting the artists, seeing the community Rachel had built. He stood in the main floor, looking up at those massive timber beams, and shook his head. "I would have told you this was impossible. That's why I didn't ask you." Rachel smiled slightly. "Sometimes you have to do the impossible just to prove you can." Summer brought more changes. The town council voted to make the Tannery District an official historic landmark. The state tourism board featured it in their rural renewal campaign. Busloads of visitors came to see the artists' work, spending money in Morganville for the first time in decades. Sarah's Diner was busy every weekend. The gas station reopened. Empty storefronts on Main Street filled with new businesses, all riding the wave of attention the tannery had brought. Marcus Webb appeared one last time in August. Rachel was teaching a workshop on historic renovation when his Mercedes pulled up. They spoke outside, away from the students. "I underestimated you." Webb's voice lacked its usual condescension. "I thought you'd fail, and I'd get this land cheap. Instead, you created something that's made the land more valuable than my strip mall ever would have been." "So you're here to buy it again?" "Actually, I'm here to apologize and to offer you a job." Webb pulled out a business card. "I develop properties across 3 states. Most are straightforward, but some are like this was. Impossible. Everyone says, tear it down. Start over. I need someone who sees possibility in impossibility. Someone who turns ruins into futures." Rachel studied the card. Director of Adaptive Reuse Projects. Salary that made her eyes water. "This is serious?" "Completely. You start whenever you're ready. Travel required, but you could work remotely from here. Build more projects like this one. Save more buildings. Create more hope." Rachel handed back the card. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm not interested." Webb blinked. "The salary is negotiable." It's not about money. It's about this. Rachel gestured to the tannery, to the artists working in the windows, to the town coming back to life. I built this from nothing. I'm not leaving it to build someone else's vision. I've got my own buildings to save. Webb studied her for a moment, then smiled. All right, but when you're ready to expand, to replicate this model elsewhere, call me. I've got a dozen properties that need someone like you. He drove away. Rachel stood in the parking lot watching artists arrive for evening classes, watching townspeople gather for the weekly market. The tannery was alive, fully and completely, 4 seasons after she'd bought it for $850. Her phone buzzed. A text from Jamie staying with Derek for the weekend. Dad says we can visit next month. Is that okay? Love you, Mommy. Rachel smiled. More than okay, baby. Love you too. That night, Rachel walked through the tannery alone. The artists had gone home. The lights were dim. The building settled and creaked the way old buildings do, talking to themselves. She ended up in Studio 10, where Henry Kessler Jr. was still working, his hands moving over leather with the practiced ease of 60 years. Mind if I join you? Henry glanced up. It's your building. Actually, I think it's everyone's building now. Rachel sat on a stool. I wanted to thank you for believing in this when no one else did. Henry set down his tools. My father built this place with his hands, one brick at a time. He poured his life into it, and when he died, I let it die too. Couldn't handle the responsibility, the pressure, the fear of failing him. Then you showed up, a single mother with $850 and more courage than I ever had. You didn't just save the building, Rachel. You saved my father's legacy, and maybe saved me a little too. What will you do if someone offers to buy you out? Offers you millions to walk away? Rachel thought about Marcus Webb's offer, about the easier path, about everything she'd fought through to get here. I'll say no, she said finally, because this building isn't about money. It's about proof. Proof of what? That people like me, people who've lost everything, people the world writes off as failures, we can build something extraordinary. We can take ruins and make them beautiful. We can turn $850 into a future. Henry smiled. Your father would be proud, I think. Henry's expression softened. Yeah, I think he would be. Rachel left him working and climbed to the 3rd floor where her apartment was. 2 bedrooms, one for her and one for Jamie, filled with furniture the artists had made and artwork they'd gifted. The space was small, but it was home. Real, permanent, impossible home. She stood at the window looking out over Morganville. Lights glowed in houses that had been dark a year ago. Main Street bustled with evening traffic. The diner's neon sign promised breakfast all day to people who actually came. One building had changed everything, not because it was special, but because someone had refused to let it stay broken. Rachel's phone buzzed again, a message from an unknown number with an attachment. She opened it. It was a photo of a condemned textile mill in West Virginia with a note. I'm like you were. Broke, desperate, out of options. I bought this for $1,000 and I have no idea what I'm doing. Can you help? Rachel smiled. She typed her response. Yes. Come visit, bring pictures, let's figure out the impossible together. She hit send and looked back out the window at her town, her building, her life built from ruins and $850, and the refusal to accept that she deserved nothing. Tomorrow she'd wake up early and finish Studio 18. She'd meet with the waiting list of artists. She'd teach another workshop on historic renovation. She'd pick up Jamie from Derek's, and they'd have dinner in their apartment above the tannery while artists worked below and a town thrived around them. But tonight, Rachel allowed herself this moment, this breath, this proof that sometimes when you've lost everything, when the world has written you off, when the math says it's impossible, you can still drive 200 miles through a blizzard, spend your last $850 on a condemned building, and build a life more beautiful than the one you lost. Not because you're special or lucky or chosen, because you're stubborn enough to believe that ruins can become homes, and failures can become futures, and $850 can become everything. The Tannery settled around her with the comfortable creaks of a building finally being loved. Rachel Morgan, who'd signed away custody in a lawyer's office, who'd lived in a weekly motel, who'd been told she wasn't enough, stood in her window and looked at her kingdom built from nothing. She'd bought a tannery for $850, fought off a developer, survived a flood, built a community, and proved to herself and everyone who doubted her that she was worth more than they'd ever imagined. But the story wasn't over. It was just beginning. Because tucked in the original property documents she'd been too exhausted to read carefully was a detail Rachel had missed. A detail about the original Kessler family, about why they'd built such a large tannery in such a small town, about what they'd really been processing in those chemical vats, and about what might still be hidden in the sealed curing chamber in the basement. A chamber marked with warnings she'd ignored because she was too busy surviving to read them. A chamber Henry Kessler Jr. mentioned only once in passing, with a strange expression that mixed fear and hope. A chamber that, if the old stories were true, contained something far more valuable than leather. But that discovery came sooner than tomorrow. It came at 2 a.m. when Rachel couldn't sleep, her mind racing with plans for Studio 18 and the textile mill owner in West Virginia who needed help. She wandered downstairs in her pajamas, a flashlight in hand, and found herself drawn to the door she'd been avoiding for months. The basement entrance was behind the main staircase, a heavy steel door with a padlock Henry Kessler Jr. had installed decades ago. He'd mentioned it only once, saying some places in the building were better left sealed. But Rachel had the master keyring now, and curiosity finally overwhelmed caution. The lock opened with resistance, rust fighting against her efforts. The door groaned open, releasing air that smelled of chemicals and time. Stone steps descended into darkness, older than the rest of the building, hand-cut and uneven. Rachel's flashlight beam cut through blackness that seemed almost solid. The basement was massive, running the full length of the building. Brick archways divided it into chambers, each one designed for a different stage of the tanning process. Soaking vats lined one wall, their concrete basins cracked and dry. Drying racks hung from ceiling chains, rusted but still intact. And at the far end, behind a wall of shelves that had collapsed years ago, Rachel saw another door. This one was different, not steel, but wood, ancient and thick, with iron bands across its face. A warning was burned into the wood in letters 2 inches tall. Curing chamber, chemical hazard, do not enter. Below that, in newer paint, someone had added, sealed by order of Henry Kessler, 1987. Rachel approached slowly, her heart hammering. The door wasn't locked, just barred from the outside with a heavy beam that took all her strength to lift. She set it aside and pulled the door open. The smell that emerged was overwhelming, chemicals and leather and something else, something metallic that made her nose burn. Inside was a room maybe 20 feet square with brick walls and a vaulted ceiling. Leather hides hung from racks, preserved by decades of chemical saturation, looking almost fresh despite the years. But that's not what made Rachel's breath stop. Along the back wall, stacked from floor to ceiling, were metal boxes, military surplus containers, the kind designed to survive anything. Each one was labeled with dates ranging from 1947 to 1986 and marked with the Kessler family crest. Rachel opened the nearest box with trembling hands. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were bundles of cash. Not modern bills, but old ones, denominations and designs from the 1950s and 60s. She pulled out a bundle, $10,000 in 20s, pristine despite their age. The box held 40 identical bundles, $400,000 in a single container. She opened another box. More cash, but older. Bills from the 1940s, some from the 30s. And beneath the cash, something else. Bonds. War bonds from World War II, never cashed. Bearer bonds from the 1950s, the kind that were like cash, untraceable, valuable to whoever held them. Rachel's hands shook as she calculated the values stamped on each certificate. $50,000, $100,000, $250,000. A third box held gold coins. American eagles, Krugerrands, maple leafs, thousands of them in neat rolls. The weight of just one box must have been 200 pounds. There were 6 more boxes just like it. Another box contained stock certificates, the paper kind from before everything went digital. IBM from 1952, General Electric from 1960, Coca-Cola from 1948, shares purchased for pennies that would now be worth fortunes if they were still valid. And then Rachel found the journal. It was in the last box she opened, sitting on top of more cash and bonds. Leather-bound, the pages yellow with age, filled with Henry Kessler Sr.'s careful handwriting. The first entry was dated January 1947. The war has ended, and men are returning home with money to spend. The Tannery is thriving beyond anything I imagined, but I've learned something about prosperity. It makes you a target. The government wants taxes, criminals want to steal, family wants to claim what they didn't earn. So I've made a decision. I will live modestly, tell no one about the full extent of my success, and hide my wealth where only someone who truly owns this building would ever find it. In the sealed curing chamber, behind chemicals that will discourage casual exploration, I've placed the fruits of 40 years of labor. 12 million in cash, 45 million in bonds, 180 million in gold at current prices, and stock certificates that may be worth fortunes or nothing, depending on which companies survive. Rachel read the entry 3 times. $237 million in documented assets, hidden in 1987. The calculations made her head spin. The bonds would have matured, gaining interest for 37 years. The gold price had increased dramatically. The stock certificates, if they were still valid, would have split and multiplied. The total value could be astronomical. She kept reading. Entry after entry documented Henry Sr.'s philosophy. He'd been terrified of being seen as wealthy, had watched family members destroy themselves fighting over inheritance. So he'd lived simply, paid his workers well, and hidden everything in the curing chamber, with instructions that it should only be opened by whoever owned the building after his death. But Henry Jr. had never opened it. The journal explained why in an entry dated March 1987, just after Henry Sr.'s death. Father left me instructions, but I can't face what's in that chamber. The EPA is demanding chemical remediation. If I open the curing chamber, they'll find his fortune and take it all in fines and back taxes. Better to seal it, walk away, let the building rot with its secrets. Maybe someday, someone braver than me will claim it. Rachel sat on the cold basement floor, surrounded by more wealth than she could process. Henry Sr. had hidden a fortune specifically so it would pass to whoever cared enough about the building to restore it, and Henry Jr. had walked away, unable to handle the responsibility, sealing the chamber until someone like Rachel came along, someone desperate enough to buy a condemned building, someone stubborn enough to fight for it, someone who'd proven they deserved what lay hidden in the darkness. She spent the next hour cataloging everything, using her phone to photograph each box and its contents. The cash alone totaled $18 million. The bonds, if they'd matured properly, were worth approximately $89 million. The gold at current prices was worth $194 million, and the stock certificates needed professional evaluation, but preliminary research suggested another $40 million at minimum, $341 million, hidden in a basement in a building she'd bought for $850. The number was so large it felt fictional, like something from a movie rather than her life. Rachel's first instinct was to call someone, to share this discovery, but something made her stop. Henry Sr.'s journal had been clear about secrecy, about how wealth made you a target. If she announced this, if word got out, what would happen? Marcus Webb would return with lawyers. Derek might challenge her ownership. The IRS would want their share. The town might turn on her, demanding payment for helping her when she was poor. The artists might leave, thinking she'd been hiding wealth while they struggled. Everything she'd built, the community and trust and hope, could be destroyed by the revelation that she was secretly rich. So Rachel made a decision. She would tell no one, not yet. Not until she understood the legal implications and figured out how to protect what she'd found. She carefully resealed the boxes, replaced them exactly as she'd found them, and closed the curing chamber door. She put the beam back in place and locked the basement entrance. Then she went upstairs and climbed back into bed, her mind racing. Morning came too quickly. Rachel dropped Jamie at school, then drove directly to Pittsburgh to meet with Patricia Chen, the banker who'd financed the lien payoff. Patricia, I need legal advice about asset discovery. If someone finds something valuable on property they own, what are the obligations? Patricia raised an eyebrow. How valuable are we talking? Very. Potentially life-changing. Is this about the Tannery? Maybe. I need to understand the law before I discuss specifics. Patricia pulled out a notepad. Generally speaking, if you find something on property you legally own, it's yours. There are exceptions for archaeological artifacts, Native American remains, things with cultural significance. But for most discoveries, finder is keeper, as long as the property was acquired legally. What about taxes? You'd owe capital gains on liquidation, but not on the discovery itself. The valuation date would be when you took possession. She studied Rachel carefully. If you found something significant, you need 3 things immediately: a lawyer to establish clear ownership, an accountant to handle tax implications, and a security plan to protect whatever you've discovered. Rachel nodded slowly. If I wanted to move slowly, to understand what I have before making any announcements, is that legal? As long as you're not hiding assets to avoid existing debts or legal obligations, yes. Taking time to assess value and plan properly is smart, not illegal. But Rachel, if this is what I think it is, if you found something in that building worth real money, you can't hide it forever. Eventually, you'll need to declare it, protect it legally, and deal with the consequences. I understand. I just need time to do this right. Patricia handed her business cards for 3 attorneys and 2 accounting firms. These people are discreet and experienced with sudden wealth. Call them before you tell anyone else. And Rachel, whatever you found, don't let it change who you are. I've seen money destroy people who weren't ready for it. Rachel spent the next week consulting with professionals, all bound by attorney-client privilege. The news was better than she'd hoped. The assets in the curing chamber were legally hers. Henry Sr. had owned them outright, hidden them on his property, and left no will specifying their distribution. When Henry Jr. abandoned the building, he'd abandoned any claim to its contents. The property had passed through tax sales and eventually to Rachel. Everything in that basement was hers. The tax implications were manageable. She'd owe capital gains on liquidation, but not until she actually sold the assets. The bonds could be redeemed. The stock certificates were still valid and had split multiple times over the decades. The gold was pure profit, and the cash, while technically she should report its discovery, was old enough that proving its source was impossible. Her attorney suggested treating it as found money, paying taxes on it as income, and moving on. But the real question was what to do with it. Rachel sat in her apartment one evening, Jamie asleep in the next room, and made lists. $341 million. More money than she'd earn in 10,000 lifetimes. Enough to change everything or ruin everything, depending on how she handled it. She could tell no one and live modestly, just like Henry Sr. had, sitting on a fortune she never touched. She could announce the discovery and watch her life explode into chaos, media attention, and people wanting pieces of what she'd found. Or she could find a middle path, use the money quietly, strategically, to do more of what she was already doing, save more buildings, help more people, build more hope. The decision came to her at 3 a.m., clear and certain. She would liquidate slowly, over years, using financial structures that protected her privacy. She would establish trusts and foundations that could fund renovations across the country. She would stay in Morganville, keep running the Tannery, and live the same life she was living now. But behind the scenes, she would become the anonymous benefactor who saved condemned buildings and created opportunities for people like her, people the world had written off. Henry Jr. was the first person she told. He deserved to know. She brought him to the basement one evening after everyone else had left, and together they opened the curing chamber. Henry stood in the doorway, staring at the metal boxes, tears streaming down his face. "I knew it was here. I always knew, but I was too afraid to look." He picked up his father's journal, reading the entries with shaking hands. He built this fortune $1 at a time, lived in a simple house, drove a used car, gave money to workers and town causes, but never let anyone know how much he really had. Because he understood that wealth makes you a target, that everyone wants a piece of what you have. Rachel understood completely. "What are you going to do?" Henry asked. "I'm going to do what your father wanted. Pass it to someone who'll use it to build something beautiful. I'm going to save buildings like this one, help people like I was, and I'm going to keep it quiet, just like he did, because the money isn't the point. The building is the point. The community is the point. The proof that broken things can be fixed is the point." Henry smiled through his tears. "My father would have liked you. I think he planned for someone exactly like you." Over the next 6 months, Rachel worked with her legal team to quietly liquidate assets. The bonds were redeemed through multiple financial institutions to avoid raising flags. The stock certificates were sold in small batches over time. The gold was converted gradually, and the cash was deposited in amounts that wouldn't trigger automatic reporting. By summer, Rachel had $341 million in various trusts and investment accounts, all managed by professionals who understood her need for privacy. From the outside, nothing changed. She still lived in her apartment above the Tannery, still worked on renovations, still taught workshops and met with artists. But behind the scenes, she became something else. The anonymous donor who paid off the textile mill owner's liens in West Virginia, the mysterious foundation that offered interest-free renovation loans to people buying condemned buildings, the silent partner who funded artisan districts in dying towns across 3 states. Within 2 years, Rachel had helped save 12 buildings and created opportunities for over 200 artists and craftspeople. Each project followed the Morganville model: find someone desperate enough to try, provide the resources they need, and let them build something beautiful. She never took credit, never announced her involvement, just quietly changed lives from the shadows. Marcus Webb figured it out eventually. He appeared at the Tannery on a Tuesday afternoon, his Mercedes as pristine as always. But his expression was different now, respectful, curious. "You found something in this building, didn't you? That's why you've been funding projects across the state. The Tannery is profitable, but not that profitable." Rachel didn't confirm or deny. "What makes you think that?" "Because I've been watching. I'm good at watching. Every building you've helped save, every loan you've funded anonymously, it all traces back to shell companies and trusts established right after you took ownership here. You found Henry Kessler's fortune, didn't you? the money everyone in this town whispered about, but no one could prove existed. Rachel studied him carefully. If I did, what would you do with that information? Webb pulled out his business card again, the same one he'd offered months ago. I'd offer you a partnership, not because I want your money, but because I want your vision. You've proven something I didn't believe possible, that caring about buildings and people can be profitable. That hope is a viable business model. I want to learn from that. Rachel took the card this time. I'll think about it. She never did partner with Webb, but she did consult on his projects, teaching him to see buildings the way she did, as possibilities rather than problems, as futures rather than ruins. And slowly, quietly, the model spread, not because Rachel announced her success, but because the buildings she saved spoke for themselves. Derek brought Jamie to the Tannery on a Saturday morning, father and son carrying fishing poles. We're going to the creek. Want to come? Rachel joined them, the three of them walking through town that was alive now, thriving now, saved by a building and $850 and a woman who refused to accept that she deserved nothing. You did something incredible here, Derek said as they walked. I didn't think you could pull it off. I thought you'd fail and I'd have to rescue Jamie from another disaster. But you didn't just survive. You built something that matters. Thank you for saying that. They weren't friends. Probably never would be. But they were co-parents now, working together to raise a son who would grow up knowing that broken things could be fixed, that ruins could become homes, that $850 could become everything. 1 year after discovering the fortune, Rachel held a gathering at the Tannery. All 20 artists, Tom and Pete and Martin, Sarah and Frank, and everyone who'd helped build what Morganville had become. Henry Jr. stood and raised a glass. To Rachel Morgan, who bought a condemned building and saved a town. To stubbornness and courage and the refusal to accept defeat. But Rachel shook her head. To all of us, to community, to the belief that together we can fix what's broken. She didn't mention the $341 million in trusts, didn't mention the 12 other buildings she'd saved, didn't mention that she was secretly one of the wealthiest women in Pennsylvania, because Henry Sr. had been right about something fundamental. Wealth wasn't about the money, it was about what you built with it. Jamie ran through the studios with the other children, his laughter echoing off those massive timber beams. Rachel watched him and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Complete. Not because she had money, but because she had home. Because she'd taken $850 and a condemned building and turned them into proof that people like her mattered. That single mothers working 3 jobs deserved second chances. That the world's rejected could become the world's builders. The sealed curing chamber was empty now, its fortune distributed across the country in the form of saved buildings and changed lives. But Rachel kept one thing, Henry Sr.'s journal. She read it sometimes when doubt crept in, reminding herself that wealth was a responsibility, not a reward, that having money meant using it to build something that outlasted you. The final entry in the journal had been written the day before Henry Sr. died. To whoever finds this fortune, know that it was earned honestly and hidden carefully. Use it wisely. Don't let it change who you are. Build something beautiful. Help people who need helping. And understand that the greatest wealth isn't what you accumulate. It's what you give away. Rachel Morgan had started with $850 and a condemned building. She'd discovered $341 million in a sealed basement chamber, and she'd learned that Henry Kessler Sr. was right. The greatest wealth wasn't the money. It was the buildings saved, the lives changed, the hope rebuilt, the proof that broken things could be made beautiful. She closed the journal and looked out over her town, her building, her impossible life built from ruins. Tomorrow she'd help another person buy another condemned building. She'd teach them what she'd learned. And slowly, quietly, They'd fill the world with saved spaces and second chances, because that's what you did when you found $341 million in a basement. You didn't hoard it or waste it or let it change who you were. You used it to prove that everyone deserved what Rachel had been given: a chance, a building, $850 worth of hope that became everything. The Tannery settled around her with the comfortable sounds of home. And Rachel Morgan, who'd been told she was worthless, who'd lost custody of her son, who'd lived in weekly motels and worked 3 jobs, smiled at the future she'd built from nothing and everything at once. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.